Welcome to the King Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm here today with my guest, who is author, and she's also a business owner of a publishing company, Julie Connor. How you doing today, Julie?
I'm great. Hi, and thanks for having me on your show today.
Now, I didn't attempt to pronounce your middle name, and forgive me for that, but how do you pronounce your middle name, just to be
It's
clear?
well, we say Gianelloni. If you really sounded it out, it would be Gianelloni, but we just say Gianelloni. Yeah.
Gianelloni. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Well, as we begin our questioning, the first question I love to ask is, what's your spiritual energy number like right now? What I mean by that, from the spectrum of 0 being life sucks to 10 being life is awesome, where would you say you fall into that?
Well, let me say a 7.
7? Okay, seven's a good number. Seven's a good number. Thank you. I always ask that question because I believe, like Einstein said, that everything is energy and energy is everything. And so, as long as we're a 7 or better, we can have a great podcast and a very interesting show. So, thank you for indulging me with that question. So, my first question I want to begin with is, what would you say is your purpose in life?
I think one's purpose in life changes throughout one's life. When I was young and first starting out my career, my purpose in life was to be the best I could be at representing the United States overseas in my job as a diplomat. And I really worked at that for 33 years. But then my job ended. I retired. Let me just say, along about 10 years into my job, I adopted my son. So then I thought, okay, well, my additional purpose in life is to raise this child to be a successful and contributing member of society. So had a family purpose and a professional purpose. But when I retired, then I thought, okay, my son is now grown and he is, thank goodness, successful and productive. And my job is ending. So what is my new purpose in life? And so I've been working on that, which is to be an author and a publisher. So I don't know, maybe other people have just one purpose in life, but I think my purpose in life has moved over time as my life has progressed.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Now, with your background, and as you talked about, you adopted a son. I know you've done some other, I would call them servant-related type of activities. I ask this question because I'm always curious to know how different people define being a conscious leader. And so, how would you define being a conscious leader?
Well, let me start with the leader part of it. I think part of being a leader is putting yourself out there and understanding that you may be attacked for your leadership role.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be willing to accept that burden, that risk. The first one through the breach is at the most at risk. So that's the leader part of it. And I really admire people who are willing to step up and take that role. And the conscious part of it is you need to know why you're doing what you're doing. And you have to, you don't want to just be a leader because you think you deserve to be a leader. You want to be a leader because you have a purpose behind assuming that leadership role. At least that's been true for me. I've headed up many organizations, I would say, but I knew why I was doing it. It wasn't just something that happened, that's something I fell into.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, of all the things you've done in your life, your accomplishments, your experiences, what would you say you're most grateful for?
Grateful. That's the question?
Yes.
I talk about this in my first book. When I was 20 years old, I was attacked. And that night, I thought I was going to die. So I have been grateful every day of my life after that night that I was allowed to live. And every day has been a blessing as far as I'm concerned. So I've always been very conscious that we are not guaranteed anything, that you can plan your life out and think, oh, I know I have my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan, I'm moving. But on the turn of a dime, your whole plan can be upended and things can change. So everything you have, everything you're given is not assured. And you need to be grateful for what you have and what you've been given.
I completely concur with that sentiment. I wake up every day and I'm saying what I'm grateful for because I believe it's the older I've gotten to realize It's the little things that we take for granted are the most significant things to be grateful for, such as the ability to see, hear, breathe. Because no matter what we think is important that we want, if we don't have those faculties, we're not going to be happy, and they'll supersede anything we're working towards. So I concur with you 100% there.
That's right. And I had the additional personal background that my sister was severely handicapped. So I always knew that she did nothing. She got sick as a child and became severely handicapped. She did nothing to deserve what happened to her. So it was pure luck that she's the one that got sick and not me. But again, it makes you aware of that things happen to people they don't have any control over. And for those of us who manage to go on with a normal life, we're lucky. We're just lucky, and we need to be grateful about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I'm always interested as an aspiring author myself, working to get my book finished. You know, I'm always interested in learning what inspired a person to become an author. So what inspired you to become an author?
You know, I have a little bit of difficulty with that word inspired. I think in my case, I just had a talent for writing. I had this talent from the time I was a child. I was praised for my writing in grade school and high school. In college, I was an English and history double major. I just always could write. And my professional career required a lot of writing, professional writing, not creative or fiction, but writing. And I always was very good at that. So it wasn't so much that I was inspired to write. I just could write. I had that talent. But then after retirement, I was inspired to start doing creative writing, more fictional writing and nonfiction memoir kind of writing. So I don't know if that answers your question. I have a specific reason why I wrote my first and second books, but I'm not sure I would say I was inspired. It just seemed natural to me that this was my next step.
Well, that's an excellent segue into my next question. You wrote about the Camino, and I'm curious to know what attracted you to write that, or what compelled you to write that particular book.
When I travel, and I've traveled a lot, I usually keep a travel journal, just a handwritten journal where I would note down my expenses and big things from the day. So I always did that basically from, the time I became an adult. But when I did the Camino, there was this big buzz out in the universe about blogs, and I really didn't know anything about blogs. So I thought, let me find out about this blogs, and maybe I can do a blog instead of a handwritten journal. So I got some training in blogs. I got my blog up and working. I got a laptop. Off I went to northern Spain, only to find out that the Wi-Fi connectivity in northern Spain, at least at that time, was not great. So uploading photos and so forth was very, very time consuming. And I felt wasting a couple of hours and getting very frustrated every day about this blog. So about 3 weeks into it, I just abandoned the blog and went back to keeping my travel journal. But as I'm walking along the Camino, I keep thinking about things that if I were the god, the chief, the boss, that I would change, things that I think could be made better for other pilgrims, things that I wish I had known when I started out my Camino. And so it occurred to me that I had things that I'd like to tell other people about. And when I got back to Houston, then I took my notes, my handwritten notes, and I transferred them all onto my blog along with my color photos. So I had a record of my trip on my blog. And I thought, I'm going to turn this all into a book. So I hadn't planned to write a book, but it came out, I wanted a book. And so I started working on that book. And again, life always gets in the way. I walked in 2016. I thought I'd have my book ready in a year, but Hurricane Harvey hit Houston. My house was flooded. So I was out of my house for almost a year and before I got it together and got it back together. And then I had mountains of boxes and things to go through just to find my stuff. Where are my notes? Where am I from the trip? Where's it all gone? Anyway, it took me a while. And in January 2019, I said, okay, this is it. I'm finishing this book this year. I made it my New Year's resolution. I've never kept a New Year's resolution in my life. But in 2019, I managed. By December 2019, my book was out in the world. So I did it because I thought I had something that people would benefit by knowing. Both the travel advice I gave, also the memoir, which is part of the book, and also what I wrote an open letter to the Spanish government about the Camino, included it in the book.
Mm. So, what can you share with our listening audience today? And I know it's probably a lot of experiences, but what would you say is one that really comes to mind about what you experienced from a feeling, or maybe something you've seen about your journey with the Camino, taking the Camino?
Well, my son was with me. He decided to come at the last minute. And I'm the kind of personality, I normally do things pretty well. So when I don't do something well, I'm very self-critical, and I'm always thinking, attacking myself for what I should have done better. And in this particular case, my son started telling me his foot hurt. And I would say, yeah, my feet hurt too. We're walking a lot every day. My feet hurts too. And the next day he would say, Mom, my foot hurts. And I said, James, get over it. Of course your feet are going to hurt. We're walking long distances. And, this went on for like a week. And finally we were having lunch with a couple of other pilgrims we met along the Camino. And the man said, he'd been to the clinic 3 times already about his feet. His feet were hurting so badly. And then the woman with us said, oh yeah, she'd been to the clinic twice already. And I thought, well, maybe I better take my son to the clinic and we can find out what's wrong with his foot. So we went to the clinic, and sure enough, he was diagnosed with plantar fasciitis, which I had actually had many years before, and I know how painful that is. But his plantar fasciitis was different than mine. I could not have walked the way he was walking, even with pain. So, I felt very bad because I felt like I had been a bad mom. I had ignored his telling me that his foot hurt, and ignored it and poo-pooed it. And so I'm sitting there evaluating myself as a mother, saying, I've got to do better. I've got to do better. Now that's a self-critical moment around the Camino that just brings me back to being self-aware and trying to do better at the things that I care about.
Absolutely, that's definitely extremely important. How many miles were you all walking? Was it per day or per week? Was it a certain schedule like that?
Well, it's about 500 miles along the French route, which is the route we took. And I walked the majority of that. But my son couldn't walk after he got diagnosed with plantar fasciitis. So he would take a bus or a taxi, and we would meet up at the end of the day. Sometimes he would say he was tired of being alone, and would I spend the day with him? So on those days, I would go with him on the bus or the taxi, and we'd spend the day together. And also, we would stop in the larger towns to visit the cathedral, go to museums, wash our clothes, just do all kinds of things. So we went slowly, and on purpose. I planned it in my trip that we would go slowly. So I didn't walk the full 500 miles, but I walked way, way, way over 100 kilometers, which is the minimum that you have to walk to qualify for what's called a Compostela, which is the official recognition that you have done a pilgrimage.
Very interesting. Very interesting. As we shift back to your writing experience, what would you say is the most difficult challenge you have to writing your first book?
I had 2 issues that really slowed me down. And one was a technical issue, and one was a philosophy issue, I would say. So the technical issue was, in some senses, I was writing 2 separate books. One was a guidebook for people who were thinking of maybe walking the Camino, and then one was a memoir. But I didn't want to have 2 separate books. I wanted to have one book. And so I kept thinking about how I could make this work so that it was a complete book, but it worked. So I thought about, well, I can have 1 chapter of how-to and then 1 chapter of memoir that illustrates why it's important that you know that. Or I thought I can have just alternating chapters, 1 chapter of how-to, 1 chapter of memoir, and go through it that way, grading it through the 2 ways. And in the end, I kept thinking, and postponing, moving forward, trying to figure out the organization. And finally, I got to an organization that I felt comfortable with. So I saw that, but I fully expected that when the reviews came back, people would say, oh, this doesn't work, it's organizationally. And I was really surprised. Only one of the reviewers that reviewed my book said, this really should have been separated into 2 books. And everybody else said they liked having both parts together. So I felt good about that. The second part was, I really was afraid. There is a prevailing culture on the Camino that says that you must walk the Camino, the pilgrimage, and many people are what I call purists or fundamentalists. They think you must carry everything on your back. And I neither believe that you must walk, nor that you must carry everything. So I'm a bit of a heretic, more than a bit. I'm a heretic as far as a purist are concerned. I don't care how you travel the Camino. I just care that you do it. And I care that you do it in a way that makes you feel that you have accomplished your goal, whatever it is, on the Camino. And let me say, a lot of people are walking because they lost a loved one and they're grieving. And so they use the walking and the pilgrimage as a form of letting their grief out. Some people have something in their past that they feel they have to do penance for. Some people have suffered something traumatic and they're trying to go through that trauma. There's all kind of different reasons for walking. In my case, it was pure gratitude. I had felt since I was 20 years old that I wanted to do a pilgrimage to give thanks, and that's what I was doing. But my point is, I think people can do the Camino however it works for them to solve whatever issue it is they're doing the Camino for. Even if it's just pure wanting to learn about the Camino and the churches along the Camino and northern Spain, do it. But I was afraid that when my book was reviewed, some of the purists would attack me. I was really afraid of that because people are very vocal on their attitudes. And again, I was pleasantly surprised that didn't happen. That didn't happen. Along the way, as I was walking, I heard a lot of people very vocal about, oh, that person's not a real pilgrim because they're sending their luggage forward with a messenger service. Very, very unkind remarks for people who are supposed to be on a pilgrimage. But so I was afraid of that, and it held me back a bit, thinking how outspoken should I be in my book? And I finally said, look, this is what I believe, so I'm going to say it.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. What about being an author you enjoy the most?
I don't think enjoy has that word joy in it. And I don't think I think of writing as joy. It's work. It's a chore. And this comes out of my career. I did a lot of writing in my career. I wrote speeches, I wrote briefing papers, I wrote reports back to Washington. But it wasn't joyful. It's work. And even now, writing is work. I don't want to say force myself, but I have to really want to write something to sit down and write. So if I have any joy, it's when someone has read something I've written and gives me feedback, positive, constructive feedback. That really does give me joy to know that, you write something and then it goes out into the world and it's like it goes into a black void sometimes. So it's wonderful when someone posts a review or contacts you and gives you a response to what you've written. That's, I think, for me, where the joy is.
Now, what is your latest book about?
So my second book was about international adoption, but the book I'm supposed to be working on right now is also, it's back to the Camino, but this time riding the Camino, going on the Camino on horseback. So
interesting.
That I hope I can get out pretty soon.
Okay. Well, your travel exploits definitely piqued my interest, that's for sure. So definitely have me interested now in taking that pilgrimage, which I hadn't before meeting you. So, and I definitely look forward to reading your book as well about that. Now, what would you say is one decision you've made that has the most meaningful or significant impact in your life as a result of making a decision?
Well, I'll highlight 2 decisions. The first was adopting my son. That definitely had a huge impact on my life, a positive impact. But raising a child is not easy, as any parent can tell you. So, but that was meaningful to me, very meaningful. And the second, which is counterintuitive based on what I just said, was getting a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I had always done well in my life. I'll put it that way. I did well at school. I did well at my job. And to have your 20 years invested in a marriage and then get a divorce, it felt like a failure. It felt like a huge failure. And making the decision to ask for a divorce took me a long time. It took me a long time. I went through a long process, and it was very painful. But I think having done it, it was the right thing to have done, because it freed me up from the feelings I was having at that time of anger. That's basically what it was anger. So I got to move on in my life, and that was very important to making me feel better about my life.
Mm.
So, just in general, I would say it's very hard for me to acknowledge that I failed at something. I don't like that. I try to achieve success. Maybe not huge success, but moderate success. So just saying, okay, this is an absolute failure, I've got to move on, is hard.
I can understand that. Definitely relate to that as well. In my business, what I do is I help conscious leaders build relationships, and so they can turn those relationships into connectionally intelligent tribes. And along that process, I come up with, 'cause I'm data driven with my IT background. And so for me, everything's about characteristics or understanding what I'm looking for in an individual and being clear on that. And so with that being said, you've traveled the world, you've met a lot of different people, you're constantly meeting people in the world now, even as a publisher. I'm curious to know, do you have certain characteristics that you look for when you agree to either accept a LinkedIn invitation or a referral or just a connection that somebody has made for you?
I am, like many writers, an introvert, but for my job, for my profession, you have to be an extrovert. So I put myself out there and do a lot of things, and I'm on social media. Um, for me, for a real connection with someone, like everyone else, you try to find someone who's like-minded, someone that you share interest with, someone that you connect with. But not everybody shares your ideas. So the second thing I really value is open-mindedness, a willingness to listen to the other side or to another opinion or to a different experience and listen to it and willing to really hear it. So that's two characteristics that help me attach to someone, like-mindedness and or open-mindedness. And I have to say I'm older than you are. I'm older than most people are now that I've reached a certain age. And social media for me, for example, is not something that comes to me naturally, but I'm really working it. I'm working it hard
Mm.
to learn it. So like you mentioned, LinkedIn connections. I pretty much, I look at someone's profile and I pretty much accept people that want to join with me. They have their own reason for wanting to link with me. I look to them, and as long as they are in some kind of way, someone I think that I can relate to, they're an author, they're a publisher, they're a marketer, they're someone who's working in promotions, whatever, then I accept the invitation. There's some people, though, when I look at they have no profile on Facebook. They're from a foreign country. And I'm
Mm.
saying, no, I don't think so. But then I wonder if I'm being mean. Why shouldn't this person's asked to connect with me? What's wrong with just letting them connect? And the little voice inside of me says, oh, they see an older lady who maybe they can figure out some way to exploit. And there's so many stories about people being taken advantage of,
Mm-hmm.
scammed, and so forth. So I try to exercise a little bit of caution on who I connect with, but basically I'm open to anyone who wants to connect.
Okay. Now, along the same lines, I believe that we can't really get to, now authors may be a little different, but most of us in business, we can't really achieve the goals without having some form of partnerships, without help for some other people in some form of fashion. And within that context, who would you say would be a great strategic partner for you?
Well, I'm lucky that I have found writing communities. I belong to a marketing group that's given me lots and lots of advice and ideas and help. I belong to several writers groups here in Houston and Houston Writers Guild and Write Space and other organizations. I belong to several national organizations, writing organizations. So those kinds of networking experiences for me have been fundamental because the publishing business and the writing business is undergoing a paradigm shift. Just like newspapers have gone out of business, the whole business has been upended. The same is true for publishing and writing. The kind of writing that I was aware of as far as creative writing when I was young, that practically doesn't exist anymore. We're down to 5 big traditional publishers, and the rest are all small publishers, academic publishers, indie publishers, or self-publishing. So the whole atmosphere, the whole environment has changed. And you have to connect and figure out the new environment. And we're all learning this together, by the way. We're only talking about a revolution that's like, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 years old. So we're still all figuring it out. For me, the networks that I can most use are the networks that help me figure out how to get my books out there. So marketing, promotion, sales, that kind of thing. Basically, writers work in an isolated atmosphere. So then you have to get your product out before the public.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I'm curious to know, do you have to keep yourself as a writer engaged and in the right mindset and right mind frame for writing? Are there certain morning rituals that you go through to kind of put you in that state?
I don't think I have rituals, but what I do is when I'm brushing my teeth and getting myself ready for the day, I think about my day. I think about what I have on my calendar, what's coming up that day, and also further down the week. What is my to-do list, my very important to-do list? What do I have to accomplish today? What can I hope to accomplish today? And that always keeps me looking towards the future. I'm moving forward. I'm looking towards the future. I'm not agonizing about mistakes I made yesterday or what I could have done better. I try to move forward by thinking what comes next.
Excellent, excellent. My next question is, I want to define it, is what kin connection, or is there a kin connection you would like to meet? Now, what I mean by that is, it's not a play on my name or my company name. It's a title that I've given to an individual who has achieved a certain level of success with his personal, professional career, that if you were to connect with this person, kind of co-create, it will help to grow your business exponentially. And what I mean by that, I've developed a process for getting to these individuals so that you do meet someone, you're not a fan where leverage is here and they're here and you're here. It's more of a co-creative process. So, for example, mine would be Magic Johnson. As a developer, business person, he would be someone who I would love to sit down with and just kind of look at ways we can co-create around creating conscious communities. So within that context, do you have someone that would be a great kin connection for you that you'd be interested in connecting with?
Well, any of the people who are outstanding in the indie publishing world would be good people for me to try to get to know personally. I belong to their organizations, but as you say, I'm just a member and they have thousands of members in their organizations. Other than that, other than meeting some of the top people in the current indie publishing world, the people that I want to meet, the people that I want to connect with are writers who are writing in areas that I want to work in. And my publishing company is focused on travel, history, international affairs, and anything Houston related. And by that, I mean Houston author or something about Houston, some kind of Houston connection. Those are the 4 areas I want to work in. I am working in. I'm coming out with a new book in October that I didn't write it, I'm publishing it. I'm very excited about. So the more books I can get out there under my label, Bayou City Press, the more my network will start to spread, and that's what I need to do. So as I said, I'm very active in a lot of writing communities, and I need to keep doing that and trying to meet the people who are movers and shakers within this world.
Absolutely. Now, my last question would be, is there a book that has been either the most influential in your life or maybe the most influential in the past week of things you've read that you want to share with our listening audience as this is a must-read book because it X?
Well, I'll go back to my first book. As I say in my first book, I had several motivations for walking the Camino. One, I've already mentioned that I was attacked and thought I was going to die. Another was I had cancer and managed to live through it, and I felt very grateful about that. But another motivation was that I read a book back when I was 20 years old called Iberia by an author who was quite well known and popular in the 50s, 60s, 70s, named James Michener. And I was living in Portugal. I was teaching English as a foreign language and very poor, I'll put it that way, not making much money as a teacher. But James Michener wrote this book, Iberia, and it's still, I believe, the best book to read about Spain that you can find, and Portugal to a lesser degree, but mainly Spain. And his chapter 13 in Iberia was about the Camino de Santiago. And when he wrote his book back in the late 60s, nobody was walking the Camino. It had totally fallen out of general knowledge and certainly popularity. Since his book, there's been a huge surge of popularity in the Camino to the point that some 300,000 people made this pilgrimage the year before the pandemic. So his book, I think, was one of the things that started this wave. It certainly was for me, because I read about it when I was 20 years old, and it took me 45 years to actually do it, but it was always in my mind. So as far as kicking off my writing career, I would say James Michener was a huge influence because of his book about Spain and about the Camino. And his book isn't about the Camino, but he has a chapter about the Camino. And I love history and I love travel. And so it really sparked my imagination.
Well, Julie, thank you very much for being a guest on the King Connections podcast. I appreciate your investment of time and energy and the wonderful insights you shared with us. And before we wrap up, are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our listening audience, as well as your contact information? They can find out where to get your books and how to get in contact with you for publishing opportunities.
So I have two websites. One is my publishing website, BayouCityPress.com. Bayou's B-A-Y-O-U. That's Houston's nickname, Bayou City, because we have 7 bayous that run through our city. That's one of the reasons we have a flooding problem. It's because we're crisscrossed with bayous. But anyway, my website is BayouCityPress.com, and there I list my books and all the products I sell and so forth. And then I have my author website, which is JulieConnor.com. I'm sorry, JulieConnorAuthor.com, and Connor for Connor. And there I talk a little bit about my writing journey and so forth. It's a more personal website. So that's 2 ways to contact me, either through my publishing company or through my author website. As for closing words, I just want to say a sincere thank you to you, because this is the way I think I can connect with people who aren't part of my natural community, people who maybe are not writers, who are not interested in writing a book, who maybe don't even read that much. And that's one thing. My son is not a reader, so I turned my first book into an audiobook so that people who don't like to read can still listen to the story of the Camino, my Camino, and how to travel a Camino, in case that at all piques their interest. So I appreciate a chance to connect with your audience, and thank you for that opportunity.
Well, again, thank you for sharing your stories and your presence as well. And listening audience, again, thank you all for listening for another episode of King Connections podcast. And until the next podcast, I want to wish everyone a blessed and productive week. And thank you again, Julie.
Thank you.